The most powerful machine gun of World War II had a tiny problem. A problem soldiers discovered only when it was too late. Midair, in the mud, under fire. The .50 caliber Browning was supposed to be unstoppable. Instead, it kept jamming. Crews died because of it. Planes went down because of it. And the Army told soldiers, "That's just how it is." Until one mechanic did something so simple, so cheap. It sounded like a joke. He fixed a battlefield weapon with a nail. Here's how a tiny field fix changed one of the most important guns of the war. The solution came from the field, not from an engineer in a lab coat, not from an officer with a clipboard, from armorers and mechanics scattered across North Africa, the Pacific, and Europe between 1942 and 1943. Men who lived with the weapon every day, who saw what headquarters didn't. One name appears in multiple accounts. Technical Sergeant Charles Ruby, an armorer with the 8th Air Force in England. Ruby worked on bombers. He watched gunners come back shaking their heads. He listened to the same complaint over and over. It jams when we need it most. And he started asking why. The Browning M 2.50 caliber machine gun was the backbone of American firepower. It fired a half-inch round. It could pierce armor, shred aircraft, rip through concrete. On bombers, it was the only thing between a crew and enemy fighters. On the ground, it gave infantry a weapon that could stop vehicles, suppress positions, and dominate the battlefield. The M2 wasn't just important. It was irreplaceable. But there was a problem. Under sustained fire, the kind you see in actual combat, the gun would jam, not every time, but enough. The issue was the headspace. Headspace is the gap between the bolt face and the barrel. Too tight, and the bolt can't close. Too loose, and the cartridge doesn't seat properly. Either way, the gun stops. In combat, heat causes metal to expand. The barrel heats up, the bolt heats up. The headspace changes. And suddenly, the gun that worked fine on the ground won't fire in the air. Or it fires for 2 minutes, then locks up. Gunners would pull the trigger and get nothing. In a bomber at 20,000 feet with German fighters closing in, that silence was death. On the ground, it meant your position was exposed. Your squad was vulnerable. You had seconds to clear the jam, or you didn't come home. The Browning M2 had been in service since 1933. It passed every test the Army gave it. It worked in trials. It worked in demonstrations. It worked in controlled conditions. But controlled conditions aren't combat. Test ranges don't replicate the heat, the vibration, the sustained fire of a real battle. A gun might fire a few hundred rounds in testing. In combat, crews were firing thousands. And there was another problem: bureaucracy. The headspace on the M2 had to be set manually. It required a special gauge, a specific procedure. Armorers were trained to set it before a mission. But once the gun was mounted and the mission started, there was no way to adjust it. If the headspace shifted during combat, and it did, you were stuck. The Army's answer? Set it correctly before you go up. As if heat and vibration would obey a manual. Crews complained. After-action reports mentioned it. But the gun had been in service for years. Changing it would mean admitting a flaw in a weapon the entire military depended on. So the problem stayed, and men kept dying. Charles Ruby wasn't interested in policy. He was interested in keeping his crews alive. He started pulling apart guns that had jammed. He measured the head space cold, then hot, then after sustained fire. The numbers didn't lie. The gap was changing. Ruby talked to other armorers, compared notes. The pattern was clear. The barrel would heat up and expand, closing the headspace too tight. The bolt couldn't seat the round. The gun stopped. The manual said, set the headspace with the gauge, lock it down, and don't touch it. But Ruby thought, what if we could adjust it in flight? What if the gunner didn't need a gauge? What if there was a simpler way? He looked at the gun, at the barrel, at the locking mechanism, and he saw it. A small gap, a place where something thin and rigid could fit, something that would hold the barrel in place, something that would let the crew make a quick adjustment without tools. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a nail, and slid it into the barrel extension. The idea was almost embarrassingly simple. The M2's barrel could be removed and replaced. That was part of the design, but the locking mechanism that held it in place had a small slot. Ruby realized that if you inserted a nail, or a piece of stiff wire, into that slot, it would act as a shim, a spacer. It would hold the barrel at a slightly different position, just enough to change the headspace. If the gun jammed because the headspace was too tight, the gunner could pull the barrel back slightly, insert the nail, and adjust the gap. No gauge needed, no tools, just a nail. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't pretty, but it worked. Ruby tested it, fired the gun cold, fired it hot, fired it until the barrel glowed, the nail held, the headspace stayed consistent, the gun didn't jam. He showed it to his crew chiefs. They tried it. It worked. Word spread, armorer to armorer, crew to crew. Within weeks, gunners across the 8th Air Force were carrying nails in their pockets, not because headquarters told them to, because it kept them alive. February 1943. A B-17 formation over occupied France. The bombers had just hit their target and were turning for home. That's when the Focke-Wulfs came in. The waist gunner on one of the fortresses opened up with his .50 caliber. 20 rounds, 30, then nothing. Jam. The German fighter banked around for another pass. The gunner didn't panic. He'd heard about the fix. He pulled the barrel release, slid the barrel back, reached into his pocket, found the nail, slipped it into the slot, pushed the barrel forward, locked it down. The whole thing took 15 seconds. He swung the gun back toward the fighter, pulled the trigger. The gun roared. The Focke-Wulf broke off. The gunner kept firing. The gun didn't jam again. When the crew landed, he told the armorer what happened. The armorer just nodded. Yeah, that's the trick. The nail fix didn't solve every problem with the M2, but it solved the one that was killing people. It gave crews control. Before, if the gun jammed, you were done. You hoped the other gunners could cover you. You hoped the pilot could evade. You hoped. Now you had a chance. You could adjust. You could adapt. You could keep fighting. The fix spread like wildfire, not through official channels, through the men, in ready rooms, in maintenance tents, in letters home that said, "Bring a few nails when you come over." By mid-1943, it was everywhere. Pacific Theater, European Theater, North Africa. Armorers taught it to new crews as part of the unofficial manual. Eventually, the Army caught on, not because headquarters figured it out, because too many after-action reports mentioned it, too many armorers were doing it, too many lives were being saved. In 1944, the M2 was officially modified. A new barrel design, better headspace tolerances, improved locking mechanisms. But even then, crews still carried nails, just in case. Wars aren't won by the perfect weapon. They're won by the people who know how to keep imperfect weapons running. The .50 caliber Browning was a brilliant design, but it wasn't flawless. And the men who used it didn't have time to wait for engineers to fix it. They had to survive today, so they improvised. That's the reality of war. The plans fall apart, the equipment breaks, and the people on the ground figure it out, with whatever they have. A nail seems like nothing, a piece of metal worth a fraction of a cent. But in the right place, at the right time, it was worth everything. It was the difference between a jammed gun and a working one, between a lost crew and one that made it home. The history books talk about strategy, about generals and battles and turning points. But wars are also decided by moments like this. By a mechanic who wouldn't accept, "That's just how it is," by a gunner who kept a nail in his pocket, by men who refused to let a fixable problem stay broken. The M2 Browning is still in service today, more than 90 years after it was designed. It's been modified, improved, refined. But for a brief moment in World War II, the most important modification didn't come from a factory. It came from a man with a nail. And it worked.